The Undertaker is widely regarded as being one of the greatest superstars in WWE history. Throughout his 30-year career, the dead man has had a number of iconic matches and moments that have stood the test of time, and these achievements will be recognized as The Undertaker finally goes into the Hall of Fame. However, in those 30 years, WWE have made some terrible mistakes with The Undertaker's character and presentation, which could have been fatal for the mystique of the character. Well, which times were they? Well, join us now as Wrestlelamia looks at 10 of the biggest mistakes WWE made with The Undertaker. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for daily wrestling videos and follow us on Facebook for exclusive lists. Number 10. Feuding with HEIDENREICH. During the WWE's Ruthless Aggression era, it was common for WWE to debut new stars in the hope that they would be main eventers in the years to come. Some of these stars became megastars and some failed to live up to the hype. One of the stars that failed to get over with the fans in a meaningful way was HEIDENREICH. HEIDENREICH's gimmick was that he was literally a psychopath who recited poetry, and his first feud would be against the legendary Undertaker. Well, the issue with the feud was that HEIDENREICH clearly wasn't ready for the main event scene, and someone as talented as the Dead Man struggled to carry him through matches. The feud was ongoing in late 2004 and into 2005, and all of the matches were won by The Undertaker. This did little to present HEIDENREICH as a credible threat. Eventually, the feud and HEIDENREICH's character was so poorly received that plans to see HEIDENREICH team with Snitsky against the Brothers of Destruction at WrestleMania 21 were scrapped. Number 9. Killing Paul Bearer. When The Undertaker returned with the iconic Deadman persona in 2004, he returned alongside his iconic manager Paul Bearer. The issue was that Bearer was struggling with his health and he needed to be written off television in the summer of that same year. The WWE came up with a complex storyline to write Bearer off and would see Paul Heyman and the Dudley Boys kidnap him, and The Undertaker would then have to face the Dudley Boys at the Great American Bash pay-per-view. Now, the match had a bizarre stipulation that if The Undertaker didn't lay down and lose the match, Bearer would be buried alive in a concrete crypt. This was one of the worst pay-per-view main events ever, and once The Undertaker won, he decided to pull the lever on the cement truck, in turn burying Bearer alive and seemingly killing him off. It made no sense as Bearer did return again, but WWE tried to explain it by The Undertaker stating that Bearer made him weak. WWE knew this explanation was illogical and decided to quickly move on and never address the dead man's actions ever again. Number 8. Teaming with Nathan Jones. The Undertaker is synonymous with WrestleMania, but in 2003, it seemed to take a back seat at the show of shows. The WWE storyline for The Undertaker saw him take a new SmackDown star Nathan Jones under his wing. Jones didn't really have any character or presence. The only thing that made him desirable to WWE was that he was tall and muscular. The fans struggled to connect with Jones, and The Undertaker looked rather bored by the storyline. At one point, WWE considered booking Jones vs. The Undertaker for that year's WrestleMania, but this was eventually changed to a tag team match which would see Jones and The Undertaker team up against the duo of The Big Show and A-Train. Now, the reason behind this was that WWE realized that Jones really wasn't ready for this huge WrestleMania matchup. He was green as grass, and they decided to pull him from the match. It would then become a 2-on-1 handicap match and consequently one of The Undertaker's more underwhelming WrestleMania encounters. But which was the most underwhelming? Well, number 7, his feud with Giant Gonzalez. Giant Gonzalez made his WWE debut at the '93 Rumble, attacking The Undertaker and eliminating him from the match. His presentation and character was downright disturbing as he wore a bodysuit with fake hair and muscles sprayed on the attire. Nobody took him seriously, and WWE tried to act like he would be the one to finally take the dead man down. Well, he did, but he knocked him out using chloroform. Yeah, one of the biggest superstars to ever step foot in the ring had to use chloroform. The match was a disaster, and The Undertaker deserved better, but the WWE were persistent on making the new character mean something special. They would meet again at SummerSlam in 1993, and this finally put an end to The Undertaker's worst rivalry ever. Number 6. A dream match turns into a disaster. WWE booked a dream match to headline the Super Showdown pay-per-view in 2019. Taker would take on Goldberg for the first time ever, and sadly the match almost ended in complete disaster. Both men were way past their prime at this point, and the issue of whether both men should have been wrestling was raised after the match took place. The heat in the arena didn't help, nor did Goldberg slamming his head into a steel post. And during the match itself, Taker would be dropped on his head following a jackhammer attempt, and this was one of the number of spots which could have resulted in a broken neck for either man. The final spot of the match was to see The Undertaker perform a tombstone on Goldberg to secure the victory, but once again, this went horribly wrong and both men awkwardly fell. The match was falling apart and they needed to end it fast, so The Undertaker hit a lackluster chokeslam to end the match. Taker's face at the end of the match just said it all, as it wasn't his finest hour and the dead man has been extremely open in relation to his negative thoughts surrounding this match. Number 5. His storyline with DDP. Upon DDP's arrival into WWE in 2001, fans expected him to be involved in storylines with the likes of The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. DDP was beloved in WCW and he should have been someone that WWE wanted to make a ton of money from. WWE decided to give up on his character, which saw him stalk The Undertaker's wife at the time, Sarah. The character's motivations were that DDP just wanted to make an impact, but it was just a creepy storyline that didn't represent the DDP that fans loved in WCW. He would then embark on a storyline with The Undertaker which completely killed his career. Taker wasn't a fan of him and it showed, as he gave absolutely nothing in the feud. The Undertaker won all their featured matches and his ex-wife Sarah even pinned DDP on Raw. Now this was a rare case of the dead man letting personal issues get the better of him, but it was still truly disappointing to see. Number 4 is fake retirement. Now the main event of WrestleMania 33 featured The Undertaker losing to Roman Reigns. This match was intended to act as The Undertaker's final farewell match, as he was to hang up his boots following the match. Once it was over, The Undertaker left his coat, hat and gloves in the ring, then proceeded to break character by kissing his wife Michelle McCool. Taker then walked to the center of the entrance ramp, looked at the crowd and raised his arm as he was lowered below the stage as his entrance theme played and his signature gong sounded 3 times. It was a fitting and perfect end to The Undertaker's in-ring career, while the dead man had other ideas. He wasn't happy with the quality of his send-off match, so he decided to come out of retirement a year later and wouldn't officially retire until 2020. Fans felt like the entire match and post-match retirement was a complete waste of time and meant absolutely nothing. But ultimately it was the dead man's call and fans had to respect his wishes. Number 3. The Fake Undertaker. Now The Undertaker's been involved in some rather outlandish storylines over his 3 decades in WWE, and one of the most infamous ones involved him feuding with a fake version of himself. The feud between the two Undertakers began after WrestleMania 10, as Ted DiBiase introduced The Undertaker back to WWE, who was absent from television after losing a casket match to Yokozuna at that year's Rumble. Now this wasn't the real Undertaker, however, it was an imposter portrayed by Brian Lee. Paul Bearer then returned to WWE, informing fans that the real Undertaker would be returning at this year's SummerSlam. This led to a real-life mirror match between the two. And naturally, the real Undertaker won after an underwhelming matchup. Credit should have been offered to WWE for trying something brand new with the character, but it completely missed the mark upon its execution. No pun intended. Number 2, The Great KHALI defeats The Undertaker clean. Following WrestleMania 22, WWE needed a fresh feud for The Undertaker, so they decided to debut the 7-foot-tall Great KHALI. They had big plans for KHALI, and they were going to make him the biggest heel on SmackDown. KHALI and The Undertaker would meet at the 2006 Judgment Day pay-per-view, and to the surprise of everyone, KHALI won clean. The problem was that the WWE were trying to create a new star, but the issue was that KHALI was terrible in the ring and it was impossible to get a decent match out of him. KHALI and the dead man had a number of matches against each other, but they were never good. They wasted a rare clean victory over The Undertaker and one of the worst in-ring talents they've ever had on their roster, and this huge victory should have been saved for someone who truly could have been elevated by the monumental win. And number 1, The Higher Power. One of the most well-known storylines of the Attitude Era was who the Higher Power was. Now for those not aware, in late 1998, The Undertaker began to form the Ministry of Darkness. This was a sinister group which were attempting to take over the entire WWE. The stable's most infamous storyline saw them kidnap Stephanie McMahon, and this storyline was incredibly successful from a ratings point of view, attracting some of the WWE's highest ever viewership. And as the storyline progressed, The Undertaker would mention that he was being guided and instructed by a higher power, who would ultimately reveal himself at the moment he felt fit. There was a ton of debate as to who this would be. Some fans believed it was going to be a returning character, whilst others believed it would be a brand new mysterious character. But in the end, it was Vince McMahon. That's right, the man that the Ministry had feuded with for months was behind the whole thing. This revelation made no sense and it was one of the biggest disappointments of the time. The Ministry stable then joined forces with Vince's corporation to create the Corporate Ministry, completely killing the mystique and popularity of the original Ministry of Darkness stable. Well, there you have it, folks. 10 of the biggest mistakes WWE made with The Undertaker. Be sure to leave your comments down below, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.